Hello, everybody, and welcome to Two Goals. I'm Katia,
And I'm Maria Laura.
and today's guest was born in Puerto Rico with Dominican heritage. Nowadays, she's based in the USA, more specifically in Miami. Heidi Pellerano is the Chief Commercial Officer at Concacaf, where she develops mutually beneficial partnerships and strengthens the Confederation's commercial platforms. A marketing strategist specialized in the sports, entertainment, music, and fashion industries with a vast range of experiences in her curriculum. We're ready to talk to her and know her story. Heidi, welcome to Two Goals.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Heidi. We can't wait to start developing this path with you. And for starters, we would like to ask you, you were born in Puerto Rico, as Katia mentioned, with this Dominican heritage, which might end up being something necessarily not related to football or soccer. We are aware of other sports who are very popular there, like baseball, for example. But can you please tell us what kind of role sports have had in your family and during your school years?
Yeah, absolutely, Maria and Katia. I definitely grew up surrounded by a great passion for baseball from my parents, from my grandfather, and everybody around me. I think you can't grow up with that heritage and not be into baseball. And I always tell people my one regret is, unfortunately, I was born right around the time that the great Roberto Clemente passed away. But it was amazing to see, even as I grew into my early years, to see the influence that he had not only in Puerto Rico but beyond. And that was something that I remember very clearly about understanding that the role of sports can be bigger than what happens on the field. And like a lot of little Puerto Ricans, I actually chose 21 as my number because I wanted to be the type of person that he was. The interesting thing about me is I can tell you, outside of maybe baseball and the traditional sports, I don't come from a traditional sports family, but I was rabid about sports. Anything that I saw, I came across, I was like, what is that? How do I get involved? Most people don't know this, but my first passion was track and field. I dreamt about running the 100-meter in the Olympics. I even had my mom allow me to paint the medals and the walls in my room, so I could dream about that. I did long jump, etc. But like I said, anything I saw, I wanted to do. I definitely played baseball like everybody else in my neighborhood. But I remember they built some tennis courts, and I'm like, "What's that?" And I saw people playing, and I asked my mom for a racket, and she was always. I was a very hyper child, so anything that would help me work out my energy, she supported. So I rode my bike like a maniac. But interestingly enough, I'm sure this happens to a lot of people. As I got taller, I was 5'6" tall when I was 12. So you can imagine that's when I started getting recruited for what I call the vertical sports, the basketballs, the volleyballs, etc. So got the opportunity to play a lot of different sports. Unfortunately, not football. It wasn't a sport that was played a lot in Puerto Rico at the time. It was mainly played in believe it or not, the private American schools. So I had a little bit of exposure, but I actually fell in love with football when I was 13 years old. My mom was a college professor in Puerto Rico, and she had an exchange program between our university and a university in Spain. So we got to spend our summers in Spain while she was teaching. And one of my first summers there, it was the World Cup in Mexico. It's 86. So I remember seeing the people in the streets, the screaming and yelling at every match. And immediately I said, I wanted to be part of that. I didn't understand what the sport was. But I started digging into it at that point, and I was hooked since that moment on.
Amazing, great story of your childhood, and great World Cup to be converted in football. So moving to your academic life and the beginning of your professional career. When choosing a bachelor degree, you choose becoming an electrical engineer. And after that, you moved to become a research analyst in Answer, a company seeking to enhance national and homeland security in the United States by strengthening public institutions. Can you explain to us what was the objective of this role, and do you think multidisciplinarity has shaped your professional profile since then?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things. First, a little bit of background on why electrical engineering. I think that's the most shocking thing for people. And then when they realize I was a military consultant, that's the next shock when they get to know me. But, I wasn't unlike probably many girls and boys too as well across, especially in some of our cultures and Hispanic cultures in Latin America, that you're good in certain subjects in school and you get sent down a different path. And I can assure you, when I was a little girl, the idea of working in sports was not something that was even an option. So, being good in science and math, coming from a family of engineers, it was obvious that I would go down an engineering path. But I can tell you, I enjoyed it. A lot of people ask me all the time if I would do it differently, and I would say no, exactly because of the second part of your question. To give you a little context about my job was to advise the Air Force through a process of, believe it or not, modernizing a bomber that they had built originally for the Cold War. And the Cold War was over and they couldn't lose all that money investment in technology. So my job was to think about what modifications they needed to do to the plane to be able to fight modern day wars. So as you can imagine, I was 21 years old when I started there. And I thought it was fascinating that my job was to advise people that were like 15 years older than me, had actually flown the plane. And I would always look at them like, why would you care what I have to say? Like, your experience is so much more vast. But I quickly understand that there is something to be said about being in a role that is consultative, be analytical, where you kind of study the facts and really put the best recommendations forward. And through that job, I learned a lot about persuasive communications and writing, because my job was to convince first, my client, but then eventually create the materials that would be taken to Congress for them to be able to get the funding that they needed to push forward with our recommended improvements. So that was something that was really valuable to me. I use that till this day. And the reality is, a lot of times when you think about engineering, in Spanish is ingeniería, and my dad always says it comes from ingenuity, right? Because engineering is all about finding solutions to problems or innovate and make life better. So that is a lot of training that I rely on every day in my job. And I can tell I think differently than my colleagues, because I try to see the big picture. I try to arm myself with as much data as possible, different perspectives, before I arrive at the best solution for our confederation.
Let me just say that your energy is so contagious. You can easily notice that you're always on the move, always trying to look for different experiences and perspectives to try and solve problems. I like that explanation about being an engineer, because at the end of the day, that's where we're trying to do all the time in every one of our roles, try and solve problems with the amount of resources that we have available. So in this moving of your life, in 1997, you joined the Eisenberg School of Management in the University of Massachusetts to start a master's degree in sports management. Could you please tell us what was the composition of your class back then? And was there a great portion of female representation? Maybe if you can add to that, was there enough academic examples or case studies related to women's sports?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And so let me give you a little bit of context of what happened in 97. I tell people that I probably have my midlife crisis at 24, that you're supposed to have it in your 40s into 50s. I think I had mine at 24, because I came to this realization of my job, as I just described, was very intellectual, but it was also very heavy emotionally. The decisions that we were making. I mean, you're talking about going to war and what that entails, right? And what that requires and the impact that can have in society. So for me, I started to really reflect about, where do I want to be? You work 30, 40 years, where do I want to be? And I came to that conclusion that I wanted something that was more than a job, right? Like, people that just clock in and go like, no, I clock in at 8 and leave at 4. I clock in at 9 and leave at 5. I wanted something bigger. And I really went through this soul searching exercise. And I went back to what you asked me about the first question. The one thing that I was always passionate about beyond description was sports. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how you work in sports. And at that time, believe it or not, I was coaching girls basketball, youth girls basketball, 11-year-olds. And I would spend time talking to the parents of my little girls, and they gave me so much encouragement and advice and strength to pursue this path and passion. But it was tough being an electrical engineer. When I started going into informational interviews, if I could have described the faces of the people interviewing me, because all they saw is like, wait, you're an electrical engineer, you focus on communications and robotics, you work at the Pentagon, you did internships at NASA, why are you here working in sports? And I can tell you, in some effect, the people were really discouraging. And I remember deciding for myself that I needed to fight through that. I needed to really discover this world for myself and not give up, because people try to make it very difficult for me. And that's when I decided to go back to get a master's degree, which, by the way, I didn't know those existed. It was through sheer conversations with others that led me down this path. And I made this investment in myself to prove to the world how committed I was to working in sports. That I wasn't coming into this because I just wanted to say, oh, I love sports, I watch SportsCenter 24/7. I wanted to tell them I'm serious. I understand this is a business, and I'm going to prepare myself accordingly to do that. But to specifically answer your question, I look back about that. You made me really think, and I think my program was pretty ahead of its time, because I want to say at that time maybe it was 60% male, 40% female, which was pretty remarkable. I do believe the university made a commitment to prioritize diversity, especially because the programs were so small to begin with. But I will say the part that was not present at all was the curriculum around women's sports. And I can tell you that is shocking, because if you know the context of the time, this is right after the 96 Olympics, which propelled the start of 2 women's professional leagues in the U.S., the start of a women's football league in the U.S. So I thought it was very interesting, but because of my passion for it, and also, to be honest with you, selfishly, I needed something to differentiate myself from my classmates. I made that my singular focus my entire time at the University of Massachusetts was to be the women's sports expert. Every project I got, I did it in women's sports. I did a comparison of the 2 women's basketball leagues to determine if they could survive. I did a marketing project for the WNBA ball in terms of how they can create market share. So I focused on that a lot. And by doing that, that allowed me to get my first internship in sports, which was with the Orlando Magic, because they wanted to bring a WNBA team. And believe it or not, that's what led to my first job in sports. I finally broke through because of those decisions that I made.
Amazing. An amazing example you were back then with what you said now, and you are today, because this is what we need. We need to look at some perspectives and some panoramas and identify what is lacking there. And back then, more than 20 years ago, you saw it and you tried to develop it. And this is what we need to do. All of us look at this kind of perspectives and say, okay, someone needs to change this. And maybe I can do my part to one day this can be changed. So we all have a part on it. And about what you said, curriculum, there was not enough curriculum around women's sports. I don't even know if today we have enough curriculum around women's sports, but let's leave this here. And if some person in our audience know, please tell us, because we want to share with all of you. And as you said, from coaching basketball to little girls, you started working on the other side of the industry. And one of the first opportunities you had in sports was as a coordinator of WNBA players' personnel. Can you tell us what was the main objective of this position? What were the challenges and opportunities of dealing with the public relations of women basketball players?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you can imagine, now I'm thrilled. I'm in the industry working in basketball, and above all else, women's basketball. So I was thrilled with the opportunity, and it was an exciting time at the WNBA because unfortunately the other women's professional league folded, but it was merged with the WNBA. So all of a sudden you had this star-studded league. We actually had, I know some you guys are very young, but we had one of the most exciting young players of the time, Shamiqua Holsclaw, graduating from the University of Tennessee. So what an unbelievable time for the WNBA. We were about to do our first WNBA All-Star game. We had the great pleasure of having the amazing Whitney Houston sing our national anthem. You know, there was a lot of momentum, but we knew that we had our work cut out, right? In women's sports, everybody always compares you to men's sports, right? They always say, oh, but the NBA does this, or, you know, Major League Baseball does that. You know, they forget that those leagues are at that time 70, 80 years old, and you're like 5 years old, right? So one of the things that was my job, my job had two particular focuses. The first one was really building the exposure of the league through the players, right? Because at the end of the day, the players are the stars, right? That's why you buy a ticket. So I focused on making sure that working with the NBA and the PR and community relations departments, we identified every opportunity to shine a spotlight on the WNBA and the WNBA players. So it was always on the phone, okay, the Amazing Thanksgiving Day Parade. How can we get a player in one of the floats? Because that's global in nature, and what a great story to tell. Oh, there's going to be a reading event at the White House. The NBA and the WNBA are very committed to the reading program. So how do we make sure that we get that level of exposure? The NBA always was supportive and embracive of women's sports, and the WNBA in particular. So when the NBA All-Star Game came around every February, we had the opportunity to create a schedule of community events and other events for WNBA players to be included. So that was my job, is look at every opportunity to get our players exposed, right? Even if it was like Athlete Week at Jeopardy. Okay, we're going to be part of that. We needed to make sure that we got the exposure. But the other part was the more serious part of the job, which was taking care of these players. For anybody that has played sports, you're one injury away from your career ending. Sometimes you don't want to, think about that, but that's the reality. And when you're a woman player, depending on your ambition personally, if you want to start a family at some point, then your career, can be even shorter. So one of the things that we wanted to do is, these are our players. We need to take care of them. We need to prepare them, not only while they're playing, but what comes next. So the NBA had a fantastic program, still has it to this day, to help the players through that transition to their post-playing careers. So my job was to design the first program like that for the WNBA, for the realities of the WNBA. Their salaries are not the same. Their career lengths are not the same. Their challenges are not the same. So my job was to really craft a program. And we built something that I'm very proud of, because I know it exists still to today, where we actually started creating scholarships. A lot of the WNBA players wanted to get master's degrees. So during my time period, I paid for like 3 WNBA players to get their master's degree. One got a master's degree in engineering. Another one got a master's degree in law. It's things like that that were really very valuable. We also created an internship program, and we started by looking internally through our partners, right? Oh, ESPN is our partner. Hey, can we craft an internship program for one of our players that wants to be exposed to other aspects of the industry? Because a lot of these players love sports like we do, so they want to stay in the universe of sports, but they don't have a path forward, and that was our job. And we also did a lot of webinars and things like that, and seminars, to be able to say, hey, financial planning, buying a home, writing a resume. So it was a very exciting opportunity, because it felt to me like this was an organization that was invested and taking care of these players, not only while they were relevant on the field of play, but also beyond.
You're actually building this exact bridge for the next question, because we are aware that there is a large amount of people in sports who really rely on their empirical knowledge. I mean, there isn't like a perfect path or the perfect choice for people to join the sports industry, but in your case, you rely a lot and you like supporting what you do and what you know with academics. And in 2002, you returned to Duke University to study a master in business administration, focused on marketing strategy. What would you say, why is it relevant for you to accompany these experiences that you have normally to academics? I mean, and it's also related to what you're saying, because there is many people who are great athletes, like top athletes, but then they aren't closer to universities or to the way of of turning around what their passion or the things that they have done and accomplished to try and make it into another professional way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think there's a couple of things. The first part of it is that you have to appreciate and understand. And if you didn't do that before, hopefully the pandemic has shined a light on that. Sports is a business. It is a business that right now you see it all the time. The Premier League is set to lose X amount of billions of dollars. The Bundesliga, the NBA, Major League Baseball, as a result of the impact of the pandemic and not having to reduce their scheduled games or not being able to play in front of fans. So that's something that, as I got my career started, especially in the WNBA and seeing how the WNBA and NBA operated, I realized I need to strengthen my knowledge base. This is where I kind of came in and saw the opportunities. Okay, engineering degree definitely helps me think differently, but I have gaps that I want to make sure that I address early on. And I felt, again, this was a commitment to myself. It wasn't a requirement per se to continue to advance. I probably, but I definitely felt that this was the investment I wanted to make on myself because of the ambitions that I have for my career. And I say that because, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm an electrical engineer. I don't come from a sports family. I don't come from a group of people, or that I had a network of people that worked in the industry. I had to fight for everything that I have gotten. So the way I did that is, I'm sure all of you have heard that mentality of Michael Jordan, right? Like, I'm not the best athlete. I'm not the best basketball player, but I know nobody's going to outwork me. That's exactly the mindset I took, right? I might not be the best because I'm not connected. I don't come from, my uncle is not somebody that works in the industry, or my brother, or anything like that. So because I am the one, I'm going to make the right investments for myself to continue to open doors for me to continue to grow in this industry. So that was the first thing that was important. And then when I came in there, what I wanted to make sure I did was, take a lot of classes that I knew were going to help me as I started to shape what I wanted to continue to do in this business. But I also wanted things that expanded my viewpoint and way of thinking. So for example, I remember sitting down with the second year students and say, who are the rock star professors and what do they teach? And I remember distinctly two very interesting stories. One kept talking about Professor Francis, and she taught valuations. And everybody's like, Heidi, if you want to work in sports, why do you want to learn valuations? And I'm like, well, when I'm transacting in sports, I got to negotiate. So how do I know the value of what I'm negotiating? So I can transfer that skill set of valuation and how to value a company to how to value my sponsorships and what I'm trying to offer. So I took that class. Another class was taught by Professor Harvey, and it was about emerging markets. And again, everybody kept asking, why do you want to study that? And I said, well, sports is a global entity. Nobody taught us that better than the NBA when they expanded into China and India. Well, I want to understand what it's like to do business in emerging markets like China and India. So that was a lot of my emphasis when I went in, was really to try to take that knowledge that would help me really become as well-rounded as possible so I could play any role within a sports organization.
What you just said is the perfect mirror of this podcast, or what we want to do with this podcast, because it's exactly that. It doesn't matter from where you came from. You have a love is sports. Now you want to work in sports, okay, you can do it, but take advantage of everything you did before. And if you did, basically you can take advantage of what you learned. And sometimes you can look and say, okay, I want to learn this and that because it's helpful for me now. And one day when you reach what you want to be, or not, it depends of the person, you will take advantage of it, and you can use this as a resource for your actual position. So it's very well explained. And for the ones that are listening to us, please take this as an advice. And after you specialized yourself, academically speaking, in marketing strategy between 2003 and 2007, you reinforced your marketing knowledge and started a successful career around consultation in strategic partnerships, sponsorship deals, and client management for international brands like Nokia and American Express. You worked in sports and entertainment inside companies like Russell Athletic and On Sports. What are the main intakes that you reckon from these years? And what does it take to work and deliver under the demands and pressure of recognized and positioned brands?
Yeah, I think the first thing I can tell you I recall from that time is I was giddy. I was super happy because I finally knew that I was in the place I was meant to be all along, right? That was something that I cannot stress enough, because all of a sudden I found this opportunity to blend my analytical problem solving skills that I learned in as an engineer with the marketing and skills and business skills that I learned in business schools, with my overall I always wanted to be creative. By the way, my first dream before becoming an electrical engineer, I wanted to become an architect. So I had that passion for being a creative and designed and all of that. And then all of a sudden, I get to do all these things in what I love most, sports. So I was just over the moon that I finally had landed in this position. But I can tell you, it was also very interesting to be able to really navigate it, because it was very challenging in the sense of when you're a consultant, your job is to advise your clients. So if all of a sudden you have a client that is interested in rugby, well, I'm sorry, in my part of the world, I wasn't exposed to rugby, but I can't tell that to the client. I'm like, oh, you know what? You're going to have to call somebody else for rugby. That's not my expertise. No, you have, 48 hours, 72 hours to become an expert on rugby. So you watch it on TV, you read everything that you can, you interview people in the industry, because your job is to consult, is to advise clients to navigate. And that's what I love about that role. I tell anybody that hasn't thought about agency life to really consider it, because you get so exposed to so many things. You look at the clients that you mentioned, Nokia and American Express, very different clients, very different industries, very different tactics. So the sports and processes that we used for both was very different. So during that time and my 15 years that I did this job, I got to work on every major sport that everybody knows, like the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball. I also got to work on rugby. I got to work on cricket. But I also got to work in music and fashion and food, the culinary arts, and community relations and things of that nature. So that's what I loved that job, because it really gave me an incredible vast viewpoint. But what I also learned is what I mentioned, right? You have to continuously be investing in yourself, right? My education didn't end the day that I got my MBA degree. My education is ongoing every single day. And that's why you have to spend a lot of time reading, understanding what others are doing, and really figuring out the best practices, understanding trends to continue to understand where the world is going, so that you can, at that point for me, was help my clients. Now I do that like I'm advising myself.
Heidi, in 2007, you became the Senior Vice President of Projects and Multicultural Marketing at Wasserman Media Group. And as we are aware in this program, sports is an environment with a significant proportion of diversity in professional roles inside the pitch, but this necessarily doesn't develop inclusion. Why do you think organizations should understand minorities inclusion? Let's say women, let's say Hispanic segment in the US, but there are several cases in different realities. To build commercial alliances, to be successful in the client side, but also to guarantee and keep an harmonic working environment inside the companies.
Yeah, what an amazing question. And thank you so much for asking it, because I think it's very important for everybody listening. So the first thing I would say with this is, I'm very grateful for the opportunities that Wasserman presented. And this is definitely a case study on initiative. As I was advising clients, I started to see where they were struggling the most, and where they were struggling a lot was how to navigate the multicultural landscape in the United States. They were struggling to advise, when you are in a multinational, a global company, and you are headquartered in the US, but you're trying to deal with your counterparts in Brazil and Mexico. They were struggling with that. So I raised my hand and brought this opportunity to my leadership team at Wasserman. And I cannot tell you how remarkably supportive they were, and they gave me the opportunity to really explore this because they saw what I shared with them, and they felt like it was a valuable thing for us to develop for our clients. And why they saw the value? Because of that, right? Our job was to advise clients, so we needed to stay on top of the challenges that they were facing. And what the challenges that they're facing is that we're living in a more diverse world than ever before. We are living in a more connected world than ever before. That you can say, oh, my counterparts in Russia did a campaign and nobody else is going to care. No, now with social media, we all see everything that everybody's doing. So it was important for us to do that. But why the specific part of your question around inclusion? The first thing I believe is that I hope people can understand and really appreciate the value of diverse thinking. And diverse thinking can be a result of different backgrounds, right? It can be a result of different life experiences, right? Diversity doesn't just have to mean gender or color of skin, right? I can tell you my background is very different. Yes, I also am a female and a Hispanic, but my collective background is also very different. And I come in at things very differently because of that engineering background, because of growing up in Puerto Rico, etc. And to me, they always talk about what is the root of a good idea, right? If you look at it, they talk about a good idea is a compilation of ideas, right? You think about the smartphone. The smartphone, somebody's like, hey, what if we take a phone and we put a camera out together? And then somebody said, well, what if we put a phone, a camera, and a laptop together? And then somebody's like, well, what if we take a phone, a camera, a laptop, and a gaming console, and an MP3 player all in one, right? Or a video player. That's how great ideas come to be, right? So that diverse viewpoints can provide a lot of building blocks to get to the best idea, but also to warn you about pitfalls, right? We've all seen the advertisements around, campaigns that went wrong because they didn't represent an audience properly. And people go, how did that happen? Well, because you weren't surrounded by diversity of thought and experiences to be able to notice those nuances that can be, instead of inclusive, it can really push people away. So that to me is something that is really, really important and valuable to think about.
What a great analogy that you gave us as an example now. Let's move forward, and in this case, fast forward to today. You are now the Chief Commercial Officer for the Confederation of North Central American Caribbean Association Football, as known as Concacaf. And one of the main purposes of this podcast is to give the perception to our audiences about what our guests actually do in their job positions, what they stand for. So could you please develop what is your position about and what do you normally do on a daily basis?
Well, first of all, I got to say, Katia, good job saying CONCACAF. It's not the easiest of acronyms to say, but in the simplest forms, and then I'll dive a little bit deeper, I oversee all revenue generation for our confederation. So what does that mean? This includes everything from our media rights, our sponsorships, our licensing, ticketing, and to some extent betting. But it also goes into how do you think about monetizing our website, our app, our content, etc. So anything that can generate income for the Confederation, my team oversees. Why is that important, right? Well, we are at the end of the day a not-for-profit. I don't know if you guys knew that, but revenue generation is critical for the survival of any organization, including not-for-profits, because that is what gets reinvested. Our mission is to develop football across our region. Well, how do we develop football? By investing, right? We need to make sure that the systems are in place for us to develop football. And that's why revenue generation, and that's why I take my job so serious, because it's our team's job to make sure that we have enough funding to help all 41 member associations that form CONCACAF continue to grow football. Because football is not just about being able to play in the FIFA World Cup or the FIFA Club World Cup. Football, it's about what happens domestically with your local leagues is what happens domestically with your youth leagues and grassroots programs, etc. So that's kind of the macro view of my job. I think when I look at what I try to do every single day with my team is I like to think about that our job is to figure out how to build and grow our fan base, both in size and also level of engagement. And why do I say that? Because a lot of times people just like to go sale, right? Like transaction. And you can't be transactional in this complex world that we live in. You have to be strategic. And by focusing on the fan, you have to think about it, right? I mentioned I have to sell media rights. Well, how do you sell media rights? You sell media rights based on ratings. Well, who watches? How do you have to then drive ratings? That's where the fans come in. Same thing, sponsorships. What do brands buy? They're buying your audience that it's at that game or watching again on TV. So I have to make sure that I create programs to make sure that we have the broadest fans coming into our games, watching on TV and engaging with us on our website, on our social channels, on our app. And it goes on from there, right? Like if I'm trying to sell licensing and I'm trying to sell a shirt or a scarf, who am I selling it to? If I'm trying to get people into our grassroots programs, it's the kids. So that's where I like to always encourage my team is to think about our job is not to go out there in that all school mindset of selling, that it could be the same that you sell our confederation and you can sell a used car. Our job is to really go out there and be strategic, grow our fan base so that we have better structure of what we then can offer the people that we need to invest behind our confederation.
And moving all this specific knowledge about commercial side, I would like to touch upon women's football in Concacaf. Last year, you launched, its first women's football strategy with a vision of improving the lives of women by working together with its 41-member association on 3 main objectives: changing perceptions, building sustainable foundations, and growing participation. Where do you stand as the commercial division in this strategy? What's your contribution from your area in supporting this long-term sustainability of the plan?
Well, first of all, I got to commend you, Katia and Maria. Like, I think you guys should come work at Concacaf. You are very well versed on everything going here, so I appreciate that very much. So we're very proud, as you mentioned. We launched this last year in Paris in the start of the Women's World Cup. It's something that we're very proud of because at that time, I think we were only one of 2 confederations that had a strategic plan and vision on how to grow and develop women's football. In terms of my role within that is we work very, very closely with our women's football department, which is led by the great Karina LeBlanc, former goalie for the Canadian national team. Being able to work together, we work together with her and her team to develop a clear strategy that not only was realistic, but that it was built with some sound building blocks so that it had legs to grow, right? We didn't want this to be like a fad. It happens for a year, then it dies until the next World Cup, etc. And part of that is saying, you have to understand what I just mentioned previously. Funding is what makes this wheel go round, So we needed to work together and sit through and say, okay, how do we make sure that CONCACAF W is sustainable? That's why it's actually one of the key pillars of the strategy, to say that we created something that was commercially sound, that partners can get behind it, and really be the ones helping, support it commercially. What you want to do is, if you look at this, the success of what's happening in Europe with the Women's Super League and things like that, a lot of this coming in from the back end of the men's teams funding the women's teams, right? That's what happened with the WNBA. That's what's happening at CONCACAF. Our mission was to say, when can we make sure that we have a roadmap to ensure that CONCACAF W is self-sustainable, that we don't have to rely on the funding that's generated from Gold Cup or Champions League on the men's side to ensure that we execute it. So what we have done, working in collaboration with the entire organization, this is all hands on deck because it's how important it is to us. We've been looking at a lot of changes and a lot of programs that we can do. And one of the things I'm very proud of is earlier this year, we had our Women's Olympic Qualifier. And this was the first chance that I had as a commercial officer to tell the world how serious we were about our commitment to women's football. So we, Concacaf, funded an activation, a very significant funding investment that I won't say it because people might think I'm absolutely crazy, but it was significant, six-figure level investment. And we created what we call the Concacaf W Hall of Fame. We wanted to make sure that we activated our own women's competition at the same level that you see a men's World Cup activation from the likes of the Coca-Colas of the world and the Visas of the world. We did that, and it was hugely successful. The fans really embraced it, and people were really shocked that CONCACAF was doing this because they had never seen that in women's sports. So that's what we're trying to do from a commercial department.
And this is exactly building a bridge to the next question, because CONCACAF, I would not say is the luck, because the luck comes with a lot of work to be the best confederation if we look at women's football. So regarding to that, when we set a ranking of women's football, we can say that CONCACAF is the all-time winner in women's football at the national teams level. And usually sportive success helps to run and work with the rest that evolves this industry. So in CONCACAF's case, has it been easier to work towards women's football development and to build cases like you just gave this example because of this history?
So I definitely, first of all, I gotta say, it's an incredible achievement. Mm-hmm. And we're very proud of and commend the level of commitment and success that both the US and Canadian national teams have achieved at the global stage. But the reality is we have 41 member nations with 41 very different football realities. I can tell you in some of our nations, we're still trying to break down barriers. That's why it's one of the strategic pillars, to get parents to let girls play sports. They're still kind of caught in that old school mentality of what it means to play sports, that's not a place for a girl. And we're trying to focus on them to see the value of sport, because it's a tremendous value from a health perspective. It's a value from a leadership. And I talk to people all the time. You know how I learned to lose and be a good loser is through sport, right? How else do you get to learn that in a way? You don't want to learn that in business, that you're in the middle of a big merger and acquisition and it falls apart, and that's the first time you've dealt with failure. How do you manage that, being in your 40s or 50s and that's the first time you're dealing? Like, you're not going to be very well equipped to handle that. So we spent a lot of time talking about that. My job at the end of the day, or CONCACAF's job as a whole, is not to make sure that these girls get to play in World Cups and win titles. Our job is to open opportunities, and we believe football can be that catalyst. You look at countries, in our 41 nations, we have one of the world's richest economies in the US. We also have one of the world's poorest economies in the world, in Haiti. We have one of the biggest countries in the world, again, in the US. We have the smallest country in FIFA with Montserrat, and we deal with things like, I remember talking to Karina, and she said, you have no idea, Heidi, all the great progress we were making in this particular country. And I said, okay, then what happened? A hurricane came through and half of the families moved. So we have to start again. So it's things like that, right? And what we want to make sure is that we think about that consistently, because, like I mentioned, we believe that football has the opportunity to transform lives. Using Haiti as an example, we have a number of young girls playing there that through the participation in sport have been identified by, or scouted by college coaches here in the United States, and all of a sudden they have an education and they're going back and becoming nurses, doctors, etc. That to me is the power of sport and the power of football in particular, and that's why we're so committed to developing it. In terms of how we leverage, what we try to do is we look and rely on sometimes on the strength of the US and Canada to help us. So we do a lot of clinics with US and Canadian referees to inspire. What you, Maria and Katia, told me at the beginning, you don't see enough role models, enough people like you to say you can be part of this business. That's what we do with the US and Canada. And Mexico and Costa Rica, we bring these women to these regions like Bahamas and Barbados and Antigua and Barbuda and say, look, this can happen for you too. Right? Within our confederation, this exists, and look what's possible. That's why we love so much what the Jamaican reggae girls did last year. They started, they saw, they believed in our vision to grow women's football. They invested in it, and all of a sudden, they're in a World Cup in France. They couldn't believe it, right? So that's why we're so committed to this.
Heidi, could you please tell us a bit about Concacaf W and the importance of separating and positioning a specific brand for women's football at the confederation level?
Yeah, you know, I think a lot of times, you know, if you study brands, you want to have consistency in brands, right? But you also want to make sure that the brand speaks to the essence of what your product or service is. In our case, we felt it was hugely important to develop a specific Concacaf W brand because, you know, Concacaf is kind of like, it's the umbrella brand as a confederation, but we wanted to make sure that people saw that we have a different mission, different challenges, different opportunities, and sometimes different audiences for Concacaf W. So we wanted to make sure that we developed a brand that really spoke to that. And I'm so proud of the work our branding team did on this. Our brand for Concacaf W is We Belong. And the beautiful thing about We Belong is that it can be interpreted in so many ways depending on the young girl or woman that is seeing that. You know, We Belong can be like, I belong playing, right? Or I belong coaching. Or it could be like I'm here and I'm good. I belong at the world's highest stages, right? So to me, to be able to create something that really brought to life what we were trying to do, the mission, was so important. And then again, it goes back to really showing the commitment that we had as a confederation. And it really is the catalyst for a lot of the work that we're doing. You know, we're continuing to invest in the brand of each of our competitions. We're also continuing to invest in our community service brand. And we're also continuing to, you know, develop the strategy on our competitions. We have been working on that around the clock this year, and we'll continue to do that again next year. But I think hopefully within the next few months, we'll be making some really excitement announcements of how we're taking that strategy and that brand to the next level.
Thank you for explaining everything, especially this last part of Concacaf W, because we all need to know about it. And it's exactly one of the things that we have been saying here. We need to know what has been done in all confederations. Because if we don't see it, we cannot be it, and we'll not believe it. So we need this to be portrayed, and we need to follow and know about these things. So Heidi, we are reaching the final of the podcast, and during this interview, we acknowledge that you're a woman of goals. You set your goals and you work to achieve them. So now, what are the goals to accomplish in a long-term vision?
Okay. I'll make sure that I don't answer this into like an entire new podcast, but, you know, I can tell you, you know, before joining Concacaf, I had spent, you know, 15 years between OnSport and Wasserman. Wasserman acquired OnSport. And, you know, I was in a great place, you know, great business, great team, doing amazing work. And when Concacaf kept calling, I was like, what? And it really was, as I went through the process and met the team that they had put in place, and particularly got the opportunity to spend time with the General Secretary, Philippe Mojo, who I'd known before, but when he was at the NBA, I had spent time with our president, Victor Montegliani. And when I heard their vision for the Confederation, when they talked about the things that they wanted to do, and they were talking about it in strategic terms, right? Like they were talking about it over the next 10 years. They weren't saying like, hey, by tomorrow, I want to do this. Like that really was very exciting for me to be able to have people that a group of people that were so committed, that had assembled such an incredible group. Like I looked at the rest of the leadership team, and at that time, our chief of football, had worked at AS Roma. I was like, wow. Our chief counsel officer had worked at, a lot of big tech companies. Our chief financial officer, had worked at great brands like Clorox and Abe. And I was like, wow, this is an amazing leadership team that you usually don't see in sports. And so that was really exciting for me. And what I realized as I did my homework is I saw tremendous upside for this confederation. I really do believe every day that what this confederation can accomplish is boundless. And I'm really beyond honored to be part of the process, because we do believe we're trying to transform the confederation, not only in terms of how it operates from a business perspective, but we're trying to transform what it means for each one of our member associations in terms of their own growth and development. And we're trying to transform the players and also the communities that we serve. So, when I think about that, then I translate that into my own goals as the chief commercial officer. And I think my first goal above all else is to probably develop one of the most innovative commercial offerings in football and actually in sports in general. I want to be the one that, people call saying, what is going on at Concacaf? Like, that's pretty cool. That's pretty creative. That's very differently. And it's great because we have that ability. We have that flexibility to push the envelope. And I have the leadership support to do that. I think the second thing that I want to do is really make sure that we are a truly global entity. And when I say that, a lot of times people kind of laugh at me, but I remind them, when you look at CONCACAF, the composition of our confederation, we have diasporas all over the world. Out of a lot of our countries in the Caribbean are territories of Dutch, French, British territories. So we have pockets of people, of our fan bases all over the world, and we need to tap into that. I remember meeting the woman that led the group of Mexicans in Qatar, and I was like, why are there Mexicans in Qatar, right? Like, I was so intrigued by that, and that really realized the importance of an opportunity that we had, and we started to focus more globally. And then the other thing, and lastly, that I would say is, I want to be, I always, when I interview young people, I always say, who do you admire? Why do you admire them? And I always use that when I hire them and say, what I want you to do is that even though we'll probably never know, is I want somebody to come in and say, when they get asked that question, that they dream about working at CONCACAF. Because they see the incredible work that we're doing and they're excited about the impact and the opportunity that presents. That to me is the goal, that all of a sudden, every time we post a position, I get, hundreds of thousands of resumes, even though that makes my work that much harder. But to me, that means we're doing things the right way because people see it and want to be part of that transformation.
Heidi, we cannot thank you enough for telling your story, for accepting our invitation. And actually, you just mentioned you hope there is people out there inspired. You already have two. I can speak from Katia. Following this interview with you, we really admire the things that you have accomplished and the way that you have, struggled for accomplishing them. So really thank you for accepting two goals in your table today.
Well, thank you so much, Katia, Maria. What an incredible opportunity. By the way, I have to commend both of you for doing this podcast. I remember seeing it and reading it and going, wow, I didn't have that kind of, presence when I was younger. I found other ways to contribute to the industry. So I commend you for doing that so early on and exposing a lot of people like you and the next generation to the opportunities of working in this phenomenal industry. I think what I will say, it's not going to be easy, but don't be deterred. Like, we can truly be change makers and this industry needs it. So I hope a lot of people listening today are inspired and want to follow not just in my footsteps, but also in the footsteps of you both, because if they do that, the world is going to be a great place.
Well, football enthusiasts out there, you just heard this. This doesn't get any clearer than that. It's just try and do not be defeated for failure. Just keep working, keep doing the things that you like, and try away to inspire others. I think that's maybe the last lesson that we can take from this. Remember to stay tuned. Remember following us with the account @2goals podcast. Thank you so much. Remember, we're also on YouTube. Please go there, give us some love, and have a lovely week.